Will Brieger on government affairs, legislative advocacy, and building environmental policy that actually works. Imagine a regulation designed to protect the air people breathe, written by people who have never set foot inside a courtroom, a legislative chamber, or a refinery. It gets passed. It gets ignored. Eventually, it gets litigated into irrelevance. The goals were sound. The policy, in practice, failed. This is the problem Will Brieger has spent a career trying to solve. An environmental lawyer, former deputy attorney general, and longtime enforcement official at the California Air Resources Board, Brieger has worked across all three branches of California state government. That breadth of experience is rare. And it shapes everything about how he now advises businesses, policymakers, and advocates on environmental policy strategy and legislative affairs. One cannot expect to change government policies without knowing how the government actually works, Brieger said. It sounds simple. It isn't. From a family of public servants to the front lines of environmental law, the roots of Brieger's career run deep. Both of his grandmothers volunteered their time to protect the environment and democracy. His mother was passionate about the outdoors, civil rights, and social justice. Naval officers appear in his family tree stretching back before the Civil War. Public service, he has said, was simply a given. Growing up surrounded by civil rights marches and political discussions, Brieger was drawn to the law not as abstraction but as action. He watched lawyers play a direct role in the civil rights movement and recognized the work as something that suited him, intellectually demanding, sometimes competitive, and consequential in the real world. That combination of inherited values and observed example set the direction. What sharpened it was the work itself. How prosecuting energy companies became a master class in policy. For 18 years, Brieger prosecuted civil and criminal environmental cases as a deputy attorney general. Early water quality cases helped change manure handling practices at feedlots and dairies across California, pulling an industry out from under what he described as only a light regulatory touch. But the cases that shaped him most were against energy companies, coal-fired power plants, biomass facilities, petroleum refineries, and transportation fuel distributors. Those cases gave him something you cannot get from a textbook. They gave him a working understanding of how those industries operate from the inside. He is clear-eyed about the limits of litigation as a policy tool. Policy changes happen at legislatures and regulatory agencies, typically not in courtrooms, he reflected. The prosecutor's role, however important, is narrow. Lasting change requires a different arena. That recognition pushed Brieger toward legislative advocacy and regulatory design, where he believed his knowledge could reach further. Fired from a cannon, the nation's first climate lawsuit. One case accelerated everything. Brieger helped file one of the nation's first climate change lawsuits, an experience he described in terms that capture both the scale of the challenge and the speed of the education it delivered. That case introduced me to leading lawyers in several states, and the leading atmospheric scientists, statisticians and climate modelers in the world, he recalled. I was fired from a cannon into the fascinating intersection of science, law, policy, politics and economics. The metaphor is apt. That case didn't just add a line to his resume. It defined the next quarter-century of his professional life, committing him to climate and air quality work with a clarity about what was at stake and what tools were actually available to address it. What he learned from those scientists and modelers confirmed his core conviction: the technical knowledge to address climate change already exists. What remains, as he puts it, is simply enacting the legal and economic policies that will get us there. The word simply carries a lot of weight. He knows it's not simple. But he also knows it's possible. Inside CARB. Designing enforcement that deters, not just punishes. When Brieger moved from the Attorney General's office to the California Air Resources Board, CARB's landmark climate regulations were just taking effect. His assignment was to make an already strong enforcement program sharper, setting high internal standards and clear expectations for regulated industries. His philosophy on enforcement reflects years of courtroom experience tempered by an understanding of how businesses actually operate. Enforcement, he argues, must be paired with compliance assistance. Punishing parties who simply didn't understand what was required isn't justice. But where the rules are clear and violations are deliberate, the consequences must be meaningful enough to deter others. He uses a blunt analogy to make the point. If only half of bank robbers are caught and the consequence is simply returning the money, the number of bank robberies would surge. The same logic applies to environmental markets. When one company in CARB's low-carbon fuel standard program misrepresented its operations to earn thousands of environmental credits, the response was proportional and deliberate. The company returned every improperly obtained credit and paid a significant penalty for each one. On the regulatory design side, Brieger's guiding principle is flexibility paired with clarity. Setting performance standards without dictating exactly how to achieve them has been, as he describes it, CARB's secret sauce from the beginning. Market-based programs are one expression of that flexibility. But market rules, he stresses, must be strictly enforced. One party's failure in an emissions trading market doesn't just harm regulators. It harms every other participant playing by the rules. Why will Brieger moved from enforcement to advocacy? The shift from government service to independent advocacy wasn't a departure from his values. It was an extension of them. Brieger launched his advocacy practice with a specific goal: to give sustainable technologies and businesses the level playing field they need to compete and succeed. His assessment of the current landscape is direct. The playing field, he says, remains tilted toward incumbent industries, some of which actively resist the changes needed to protect what he calls our collective economic, environmental and even physical health. His services as a legislative affairs consultant draw on a skill set that few advocates can match. 18 years of civil and criminal environmental prosecution, direct experience drafting enforcement provisions for major CARB climate programs, deep familiarity with California's low-carbon fuel standard and emissions trading framework, exposure to the legislative process through regulatory work and government affairs engagement, and a network built through one of the nation's first climate change lawsuits. That combination of courtroom experience, regulatory design, and legislative knowledge is what allows him to help clients not just understand a policy environment but shape it. What Brieger believes about the future of climate legislation. Brieger's optimism about climate action is not rooted in wishful thinking. It's rooted in a specific diagnosis of where the obstacles actually lie. He identifies 4 gaps in public understanding that slow progress. 1. How large the potential consequences of a warming planet really are. 2. How significant the required changes to the economy and energy systems actually are. 3. How quickly those changes need to happen. 4. How achievable all of it is, given the right leadership and policy frameworks. The 4th point is where Brieger focuses his energy. He points to entrepreneurs and investors like Jigar Shah as examples of people who have steered their careers and capital in directions that serve the broader world. The technologies are available. The financing models are developing. What's needed now is governance that makes the economics work. We know how to do this, he said. Now private enterprise and public leaders need to get it done. His source of optimism is specific. People want solutions and we live in a democracy. That sentence carries the weight of someone who has spent decades watching policy move, sometimes glacially, sometimes with surprising speed, when the conditions align. Beyond the policy work, Brieger measures success in other terms entirely. He defines it as helping others achieve He has served for more than a decade as a court-appointed special advocate for foster youth. He has sat on nonprofit boards spanning education, environment, and youth sports. He rows, sails, and swims, spending time on and in the water as a way of staying grounded amid demanding work. The through line from his grandmother's volunteerism to his own advocacy practice isn't hard to trace. Integrity and service, he says, describe both his personal and professional values, and he means it when he adds that the two are 100% aligned. That alignment, earned over decades and across branches of government, is what he brings to every brief, every regulatory comment, and every conversation with a lawmaker who needs to understand not just what a policy says, but whether it will actually work. This article is for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal, regulatory, or policy advice. Readers should consult qualified legal counsel for guidance specific to their circumstances.